Okay. Uh, so we'd like to thank you all for the patience here. Get some final stuff started up. So thank you all for attending the uh, this educational. It's been quite the process, and we are like really excited to bring this to you. So for an overall view of the agenda, it's uh, and we'll do an introduction for Boise DSA, and then Kent will introduce Gerald. Gerald will give a speak and give a talk, and then let's introduces Gerald. Yeah. Then after the two talks, there will be a Q&A at the end. And as each section ends, I'll be smoothing it along just so you guys, so we keep it going and all that. So then Anne, so if you could do the introduction from Boise DSA, and also fair warning to all of the people on the Zoom call. It's it's also being streamed through YouTube. So if you want to ask a question or something of the sorts, and I don't want your face or Zoom name or whatever broadcasted, just type it in the YouTube chat, and then we'll be able to uh, uh, pull it from there and just ask verbally through me or someone else. Uh, and if you could do the DSA introduction.
Alrighty. Is everyone in the room let in? I think someone in the YouTube comments had not been let in yet.
Yeah, just let them in.
Okay, perfect. Well, let's do it. Hello, my name is Anne, and I am the communications facilitator of the Boise DSA and a member of the Red Republicans. So before we begin, I just want to talk about, the Boise DSA, kind of who we are and what we look like compared to a lot of other DSAs, as well as a little bit about the National DSA and specifically the National Political Committee, the NPC. So it has come to the attention of the Boise DSA that a lot of DSA members and chapters are just upset, frustrated, fed up with the actions of the National DSA and the NPC. And, we, Boise DSA feels that way, have every right to be. More specifically, prominent members of the DSA have actually circulated a pledge stating that they will do whatever it takes to defeat Donald Trump, which means they're supporting Joe Biden. So regardless of what you or any other chapter thinks about the matter, this explicitly goes against the democratic decision that was made by the majority from the 2019 DSA convention that said that the DSA would not endorse or rally behind any other Democratic candidate besides Bernie Sanders. So here we are, the DSA and some of the prominent leaders are kind of like finding loopholes to support a neoliberal capitalist candidate. And we're just unhappy, especially because Joe Biden does not represent the needs of working people and people here in Idaho. Our DSA is very, very small. We have people young and old, and we are located in just a red state. And we feel that, our needs are not represented by the National DSA. We feel that our needs as working people, as a small DSA, and as, just different people is not represented when the National DSA capitulates to these capitalist parties. And so we want to change that. The steering committee members of the Boise DSA do endorse the program that is going to be presented at the end of this talk by Kent and Alex. And we expect that our members, our general membership, will endorse it too. If we have folks here from other DSAs or other organizations, the Boise DSA encourages you all to share it with your members and potentially endorse it, because we want to rally behind this, and we want to rally behind building up just a workers movement and uniting our DSAs across the country. So that is us. I'm really happy to be here at this event. I'm happy that so many people are in this Zoom call, and I will pass it over to Kent to introduce our wonderful speakers.
Kent, just wait 1 sec. You're muted.
Well, that's more like it now, isn't it? You know, it's funny. This whole COVID thing has been quite awful to participation in DSA chapters. But we can have talks a lot easier now, can't we? And now we know how to do it because we're forced to, right? So I'm Kent Kaiser, as you can see by my name, and I am the chair of the Central Committee of the Red Republicans, who is a DSA faction who is just over a year old, but in reality, we've only recently been knocked into sense by older, experienced comrades and understood the necessity of program first politics, understanding we got to get behind something. And the program that we have is a draft program. It's super specific. If you're bringing up Biden, as we are, and we're bringing up other supposed socialist members of the DSA that holds public office, well, you can't put that in a program and think that's going to last very long, because it'll become obsolete. We don't want that. So obviously we're going to build on it, and we're going to make it something that a lot of DSA members can get behind. But we need people to join. Right now we're holding a space so that we can have that discussion in the first place. And we have an organization that's going to have that discussion in the first place. But we're not just going to go ahead with a draft program for the rest of our existence, to make that very clear. Now, a very, very, very amazing comrade, Gerald Smith, who is extremely experienced, a revolutionary socialist to the day he will die. He will be a revolutionary socialist. He worked in the Black Panther movement in the late 60s, all right, and he never stopped. So that's me. There's Gerald. Gerald's a member of the Red Republicans as well, and we are very, very happy to have his membership because we take it to heart that the older comrades in the movement have to teach us young folks. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. If young people aren't listening to the experienced revolutionaries of the past, then we can't build a movement. So we need revolutionary socialists working with each other. All right, not mixed up in little groups and little tiny social cliques, talking about how much more Marxist they are than another person. I'm not talking about that, and I'm not talking about a bunch of young people that are very revolutionary about their own youth and not wanting to listen to anybody over the age of like 35. No. We all need to work together, and that's really how we're going to make a movement happen. Because whether they like it or not, the left has fell apart. I mean, it's in a very disturbing stage, and it has been for a very long time. And if we're going to be the generation that apparently, by the way, is very favorable to the word socialism, if we're going to be the generation to move forward and actually create a socialist movement, then we got to learn from the past peoples, right? Past revolutionaries that were there when things failed. So for no further ado, and to stop me talking so damn much, I want to introduce Gerald Smith over here, okay? So Gerald, if you take it away, and we'll get a presentation up. It'll look real professional. It'll be great.
Okay.
For the people that are talking real. Oh,
can you hear me now, brother?
Yes.
Okay, let us proceed. Can we proceed to the PowerPoint that we created last night? I don't think people will see me intermittently, and that's nice. But what's much more important is that we have some structure to our conversation. By the way, for people that I may have invited, our young people are really trying to control this who comes into this meeting, largely because there has been a phenomenon called bombing, And bombing means really these right-wing elements and fascists have come on to Zoom calls to disrupt them. In fact, in the Bay Area, they came on to a Zoom call that was supposed to be a campaign meeting for Dia Penning, introducing her to the public. And as a result, they actually stated that they knew where she lived. They stated her address, and they said that they would do harm to her and her children. As a result of this threat, Dia Penning dropped out of the electoral race, a tragedy. But just understand that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, we're trying to defend against the possibility of this bombing. Okay, Alex, are you ready now to place the PowerPoint up? Thank you. Okay.
I'm almost ready.
Okay. All right. So really what I am slated to talk about is why we need a workers' party. Why we need air to breathe, basically. This is a fundamental question, and to some degree it has been confused by the Bernie campaign, who I think Bernie is an honorable gentleman. I really like him, to be honest with you. But in reality, I believe that the concept that we are going to be able to take over the capitalist party is actually false to the core. Under no circumstances will the capitalists allow, any political tendency, let alone a socialist, ostensibly socialist one, to take over their organization. And that was a basic premise that I believe Bernie Sanders got wrong from the beginning. It was one thing to raise the flag of democratic socialism inside of the Democratic Party. And he has, in fact, did really well by making Medicare for all, or the question of universal health care, a national conversation, to the point where 70% of Americans support universal health care. This is very positive. But unfortunately, that does not change the fundamental fact that you cannot transform manure into gold. We can never take over the ruling class party and use it for our own purposes. That's a major political error. All right, Alex, are we going to go with the
yes.
I'm looking.
Okay. One moment.
Okay, folks, I'm sorry. While we have this technical difficulty, I'm going to begin our conversation. So the question is, why do we need a workers' party? I would venture to say that we cannot. There we go. Okay, would you go to the next frame? Thank you. Okay, Karl Marx, the founder of democratic socialism, of scientific socialism, has pointed out, please, the next frame. From the very beginning in the Communist Manifesto, he taught us that the interests of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, that is the working class, that is the majority of the people, are counterposed. That is, we cannot agree with them at the end of the day on how society should move forward. The next, please. Okay, so what we have today is a situation where the rich, the capitalists, the imperialists, the bankers, the landlords, the bosses, have two parties. We, the working class, have none. Next, please. Okay, now there is some confusion, and we're going to try to straighten this up now. There are any number of pro-Biden pundits that tell us that we must, quote, settle, unquote, for Biden, or Trump, the fascists, will rule upon us. This is a panic argument. It is used to substitute for the logic of the class struggle. And that is to say, number one, Trump is not a fascist. I think that my co-worker Elazar will address that in more detail. But more importantly, it is done to buffalo you, to make you run and occupy a position that you don't support. Who wants to support a fascist? No one. So it's not enough to say, because they know that Mr. Biden is unworthy in 1,000 ways, many of which I will outline before in this discussion, and I'm sure that Elazar will also speak to it. So because they know they cannot convince you with a logical argument, they introduce the bait, the panic, the substitute for a logical argument to make you panic and embrace something that you would never embrace if you had your right mind. Next frame, please. This is the slippery slope, and I've seen it again and again and again, and it's very sad, but we have to try to understand this slippery slope. The slippery slope that they are pushing us onto. And this is these pro-Biden folks. If you accept their arguments, which you should not, then you start to try to justify these arguments, because we're all human. No one wants to partake in a movement or even a maneuver that we don't really believe in. So we start to try to justify, psychologically, we make adjustments to falsehood. And then you start falling. Give me the next, please. Next frame, please. Alex, are you there? Yes. The other problem, of course, we have to deal with is, and this is the real problem, and this is what is happening before our very eyes, and that is the co-optation of the Democratic Party of their left-wing critics. Either you recognize that calling itself the Communist Party was established and did some good work on the Black question. I am not endorsing the Communist Party of today, but I am telling you that it is worth studying the history of the Communist Party, because what they discovered was that within the working class, there are people who suffer from special oppression. That is, all workers are oppressed, but special oppression means that there are sectors of the working class that are oppressed even more. In the case of Black people, because of their skin. Okay, I have to finish up. My time is up, but let me just say this. It is very important to understand the concept of special oppression. Women suffer from special oppression. Gay people suffer from special oppression. Please, let's go to the next.
Gerald, uh, uh, feel free to finish it off. Don't feel rushed.
Okay, but I do
You have more
have to
time.
finish it off. All right, the demographics of proletarian leadership is something that I think is worthy of note. That is to say, what does this leadership look like to the working class? The demographics of proletarian leadership should look like the class itself. And believe this, at the point of production, the working class is integrated. It is multiracial and it is multi-ethnic. Please continue. I have so much more that I want to share, but I have to share my time with others, and I can't be egotistical about taking too much time. So I want to leave you with this thought. This is a beautiful poem that was written during this period I talked about, the New Negro or the Black Renaissance in the 20s and 30s. It was written by Langston Hughes, a revolutionary poet who himself was a supporter of the Communist Party during that period. This is only an excerpt, but I think it speaks to what I really feel. He says, "Better that my blood makes one with the blood of all the struggling workers in the world, till every land is free of dollar robbers, pound robbers, franc robbers, peseta robbers, lire robbers, life robbers, until the red armies of the international proletariat, their faces black, white, olive, yellow, and brown, unite to raise the blood red flag that never will come down." I want to thank you all for listening to me. We should proceed to the other speaker. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you very much. And Elazar, and just for future people, so if you're called on, just wait a few seconds so we can unmute you.
Yes, I had to switch computers to Elazar's computer because of how horrible my internet is, which I apologize for. And Alex, I apologize for that. So I'm going to talk very quickly before we move on to a comrade from St. Cloud. He's a DSA steering committee out there, member. But I wanted to point out that the talk that we're having is not going to be able to cover absolutely everything, which is why we're going to have a pretty important question and answer period.
Right.
All right. I want to make sure everybody understands that because we are encouraging absolutely everybody to sit there and ask as many questions as you can. Right. We have to have the discussion. I mean, that's just what this time calls for. Right. All right. So without any further ado here, I'm going to introduce Jacob to give us a little talk on kind of the tactics we're going forward with. And then after that, we're going to have Elazar talk. And Elazar is a hell of a hero of mine. He met me in a DSA meeting in, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I'll never forget that I just could not understand why my fellow comrades seemed to support what I had always been taught was the class enemy. You know, there were some very weird lines being drawn, especially people that were taking Marx when he was in the middle of a very strange period. Well, same with Lenin, where they were talking about something before the bourgeois revolution, right? Where, of course, the proletariat very much understood that bourgeois democracy was in its favor over feudalism, right? So I understood that, but I never forgot about what was supposed to happen after the bourgeois revolution, right? where I was told that there was supposed to be independent organization of the working class. Because if we believe that bourgeoisie is ruling class, and that both parties are capitalist parties under their control, then we could definitely not assume that these people would protect us against fascism, which they would capitulate to very quickly, mainly because fascism preserves their position, while socialism that will abolish their position. So whenever they have to choose between that, socialism and fascism, we will see something looking more like fascism come about in their eyes. All right, so let's have Jacob have a little round at it, huh?
Thanks, Kent. Okay, just to quick introduce myself. I'm Jacob Skull. As Ken pointed out, I am on the steering committee and am also the co-chair of the St. Cloud branch of the Democratic Socialists of America, which is located in the state of Minnesota here. And I'm just going to give a short talk here on what the Red Republicans believe when we are looking for our tactics and our unity as Marxists and as DSA members. So since the mid-20th century, really, the most pervading struggle American Marxists have faced is arguably maintaining a unified block of power against capitalist and imperialist forces against, in America, the Democratic and the Republican parties. This lack of solidarity and a unified apparatus under which we're operating, is still really the current biggest roadblock to Marxist organizing in the United States today as well. And in order to overcome this obstacle to working class solidarity, to achieve unity among Marxists, among members of the DSA, and among anyone willing to support our platform, this is what we need. Unity to the Red Republicans means that the DSA, as a revolutionary socialist organization, needs to be disciplined and principled. And that means conducting mass line struggle to see which methods provide the most advantageous conditions for achieving revolution. Certain tendencies prevalent among current membership of the DSA, for example, tendencies such as idealism, support for imperialism under the guise of working class internationalism. And this support for imperialism can also look like the guise of, endorsing Joe Biden or the Democratic Party. Anti-organization and anti-centralization attitudes, a lack of discipline, not allow, our ideological minutia to stop us from working together in a unified and centralized manner to defeat capitalism. And to end this off, I would just give a short quote from Comrade Vladimir Lenin, where he says, "Thus, in communist parties, broad democracies combined with centralized leadership and free discussion with strict discipline and unity of action. Democracy without centralized leadership turns the party into a debating society. Centralism without democracy or with inadequately developed democracy results in deadening bureaucracy. On the other hand, the proper combination of democracy and centralism ensures wide development of activity and initiative in the party, and at the same time, the strong leadership that is so necessary in the political struggle." Thank you for letting me speak.
Okay, thank you. And then Kent, so we're going to go straight into Elazar's talk. Oh, you should. Okay. There, you should be unmuted there in a second.
There's Elazar, but where's? Am I on now? Yeah. Good evening. I don't see anyone, but I'm going to talk to you. My dear friend Gerald ended his talk about something I wasn't planning to talk about Langston Hughes, of whose work I have 2 very large volumes of his poetry. He was not doubly oppressed, he was triply oppressed. He was black and gay. But to show you the complexity of the society and people, the great revolutionary C.L.R. James wrote a critique of Langston Hughes in the second review of Gone with the Wind. Langston Hughes co-wrote a screenplay for a film called Way Down South, which was a happy slave movie starring Bobby Breen. And C.L.R. James criticized him ruthlessly for that. That doesn't dispute the genius of his writings and his own personal oppression. So what I'm going to do is found my talk on what's going on in the DSA, and it's going to lead to discussions of United Front, Popular Front, Joe Biden's history, and unbeknownst to me, one of the chapters of DSA in Austin, Texas, was having an educational and an LGBTQ and social justice demonstration took place outside. And unfortunately, either DSA or their supporters called the police. And this group now calls DSA social fascist. So I'm now going to deal with that question also. But let's begin with the DSA National Convention and how the leadership is trying to buck the two most important decisions of that convention. They are resolution number 15, Bernie or bust, that no other candidate from the Democratic Party will be supported other than Bernie Sanders, who proclaimed to be a socialist. Now, I consider, just like Gerald, that's an error. I might be a little less gentle than Gerald on it. I consider when a socialist is in a capitalist party, the Democratic Party, that they're a spare tire for the Democrats. Nevertheless, I can understand from his rhetoric and from young people hearing refreshing socialist metaphors and ideas that they were moved to support Bernie Sanders. But here's what's happened. The national leadership about a month ago wrote a pledge saying that they're going to do everything they can to beat Trump. They didn't say they're going to support Biden, but listen to what they're going to do. They're going to do phone banking, text banking, door knocking, and campaigning. For who? It has to be for Biden. And what's important to me is in the resolution R31, which is a class struggle resolution, which should be played up on the screen right now, I hope. It says that we will support class struggle actions, solidarity with the working class, totally independent of the Democratic Party. It has another clause saying we will repudiate working in any way with racist bigots. Now, if you're not going to work with them, what about supporting someone who does work with them? Now, one of the things that's inspired me, and this should be going up on the screen also, is that Providence, Rhode Island DSA criticizes and calls for the expulsion of police unions from the AFL-CIO, supporting the United Auto Workers, was that, who called for expelling all police unions from the AFL-CIO as enemies of the working class. And also DSA statements call police enemies of the working class in terms of their repression, arresting, tasering, pepper spraying, and attacking peaceful demonstrators. That is despite the fact that in Austin, Texas, one of the DSA leaders did organizing of police unions. And later, I think, though he defended himself, he left DSA. So now what I'd like to do from that, we should be putting up on the screen this resolution, this statement by the leadership of DSA saying that they're going to be doing this work. And they call behind a protective screen of working against racism with other left groups. But who are they campaigning for? Biden. There is no other way they can do it. Only way else you could do it is with a united front. So I now want to go to, because this group in Austin, the LGBTQ demonstrators, call the DSA social fascists, and we're supposed to be putting up pictures of two things. Well, here's what they cite. They say that the Social Democrats in Germany organized the murder of Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Liebknecht, and they always forget Leo Jokshi's. All three of them were murdered by the Freikorps. It wasn't the Social Democrats. They hired the Freikorps, who later imprisoned and killed the Social Democrats. That's yet because they were incorporated into the Nazi Party. And another thing they cited was the bloody massacre of the 1st of May, 1929. That's gone down in history as the Blut Mai massacre. That is, the Social Democratic police chief, Zorgiebel, ordered the shooting down of 29 members of the Communist Party who had been ordered not to demonstrate, and they went and demonstrated. Now, does that make the Social Democrats fascist, who were later destroyed by the fascist movement? I say no. It was still necessary to expose the leadership by calling for a united front against the Nazi movement. Now, here's what's going on in DSA among my friends: the enormous pressure to vote for Biden to save us from the fascist Trump. I have dear friends whose family have deep roots in the left. The great-grandmother organized the shirtwaist strike of women in Philadelphia in 1909, 2 years before the Triangle Factory fire in New York. Her son organized the Labor Arts Collective. Freedom Song Network, was a member of the Communist Party. One of his sons was a member of the Communist Party. These people have told me that what I'm doing is criminal and they don't want to hear it again. And they love me, nevertheless. So these forces are affecting young people in DSA and the leadership, trying to capitulate to Biden and overrule these two definitive resolutions passed by the National Convention. I'll repeat them. Bernie or bust, R15. R31, class solidarity electoral politics. Class struggle, excuse me. Class solidarity is part of it. These both are being violated. Okay, so let's talk about the difference between a popular front and a united front, because what's happening now, the pressure on this leadership and many of our friends and youth is as follows. The question today is not between workers' democracy and capitalist democracy. The question today is between capitalist democracy and fascism, Trump fascism. My friends say, you don't care that it's going to be a Nazi dictatorship because you don't have grandchildren, and my grandchildren have to live under Nazism. Well, is a Biden a counterpose to fascism? Let's talk about Biden as briefly as we can. Number one, Gerald mentioned the 1992 criminal act, anti-crime act. Biden actually wrote that. He didn't write it alone. He wrote it with Strom Thurmond, the Thurmond-Biden Act. It was not approved, but it kept getting recapitulated and finally ended up in Clinton under this large-scale act that caused mandatory sentences, enormous number of people incarcerated. Okay, what else did Biden do? He opposes Medicare for all. He opposed busing to stop segregation. Who did he oppose it with? Senator James Eastland, Who is Senator James Eastland? That was a personal friend of Biden. Biden kept saying, he didn't call me boy, he called me son. What sickening, but that's what he said. James Eastland, there was a young black boy from Chicago, 14 years old, Emmett Till, in 1955. This affected my whole life. That's why I'm bringing it up. He went down to Mississippi. Ostensibly, he whistled at a white woman in a store. Any event, when the husband came back in town, he and his brother-in-law, Milam, the husband's name was Bryant, last name, came and got little Emmett Till at the point of a gun and abducted him. They beat him, they tortured him, they gouged out his eye, they tied a gin fan around his neck, and they brought him to the edge of the river, him carrying his own weight, blew his brains out and threw him in the water. Okay, now the murderers were on trial. What did James Eastland do? He found the confidential military file of the father who was executed in the military for rape. By the way, there's a book now by Weidman proving that was a frame-up, but that's not the issue now. He put that out in a paper in Memphis and in Mississippi saying, look, he's a rapist just like his father. So not only did this help the murderers get off, but it helped repress having a kidnapping charge. Okay, the murderers admitted they did it a few weeks later, sold their story how they murdered him to Look magazine. Now, how can you possibly vote for a man like this who supports police unions, who instituted 2 months after the beating half to death of Rodney King, he instituted a policeman's bill of rights. He was personal friends with Daryl Gates, extolled Daryl Gates. This law he kept trying to recycle and get approved, but chiefs of police and sheriffs didn't like it because they couldn't convict their own police of misconduct. The law is, if it's passed, you can't. Work that Gerald is doing trying to help families where police brutality and murder has taken place, to find out even who did it is very difficult because of the work that Biden did. Okay, so this is an impossibility. It poses everything that DSA says they stand for. And under this guise, this leadership is trying to do without mentioning his name. But one guy did mention his name, Eric Blank of Bread and Roses, who's part of the national leadership, along with the National Political Committee, AFRISOC, and others, are now trying to buck what the convention did. So instead of going and saying, we want a revision of the convention and calling for an online convention and taking a vote, whether or not we can, because of the desperation of our situation, that as we face either fascism or Biden, we got to now support Biden. Now, the question is Trump a fascist? Well, fascism, if really scientifically investigated, is a steep structural crisis of capitalism of such a nature due to the fact that Germany was cut off from all its colonies. Whole section of Germany was ripped out of the country, and they were impressed with enormous reparation damages. So the big monopoly capitalists had to rationalize, and they reached a point where they couldn't make what Marxists call surplus value. They generally say profit. We say surplus value because that also includes rent that they pay if they don't own the land, money that they borrow from the bank. All that is surplus value created by the workers, not paid for by the capitalists. If they paid the workers in full for what they did, there wouldn't be a surplus value for the capitalists. That's why they are exploiters. That's why their political party is a party of exploitation, and why DSA should march, as they say, with the working class and oppose those who capitulate to capitalism, which obstructs progressive change. That's virtually in the program of DSA. The working class causes progressive change. The capitalist class is an obstructor of capitalist change. There is no, now why do we need not only a party, a revolutionary party, is to aid the working class to self-liberate itself by having an iron hard party supporting it, open to it, constant communication between the advanced workers and the Revolutionary Party to lead it to what DSA says they stand for, socialism. Okay, so let me just mention this social fascist thing. The Communist Party made the error of calling the Socialist Party fascist because of Bloody May, but the reality was, at the moment when the capitalist class couldn't afford to pay off the Socialist Party for the little benefits they gave to the working class, at that moment, and they were being kicked out, that's when the Communist Party called them the principal enemy. And even though local united fronts of socialists and communists and Christian workers and other sectors that formed popular fronts, both their movements said, if you persist in this, we're kicking you out of our party. Communists said, we're going to kick you out of the party. Social Democrats said, we'll kick you out of the party. We say that this program of United Front is the only way to stop authentic fascism. It's the only way to stop Trumpism. Trump is a populist demagogue who's a bigot and a racist. He doesn't have a mass middle-class movement ready to batter and smash down the working class. The Proud Boys could not attack even a local union. As pathetic as the unions are, if they went and attacked SEIU, that would be the end of the Proud Boys. So that's a little right-wing blabbermouth movement that could kill an individual person. Like I think that they were involved in the killing of Nia Wilson, but it's debatable. Okay, thank you very much. I hope any questions you have that you don't get to answer, please contact the website that will be put up, the Red Republican website, and Gerald and I or others will answer any and all questions you don't get to answer right now. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Gerald and Elazar. So we are going to be putting up, in a moment, we will be unmuting.
How long it took.
Sorry.
I did mine quickly.
Unmuting. Unmuting the chat. So you all can ask your questions and okay. So if you haven't asked any questions, just type stack in the chat right now. The chat should be available for everyone to type into. Then if you're type stack, and then it's first come first serve. We'll call on you, and then we'll allow you to unmute, and then you can ask your question. So go ahead and type stack in the chat. See if you have a question. Okay, Mark has a couple questions. I will. Okay, so far, okay. Okay. Mark is first. So you're free to ask your question.
Yeah, I'm good with just asking a question and then, coming back to me after everybody else speaks. Um, but my name is Mark. I'm a member of the Palm Beach County chapter of the DSA. I'm down here in South Florida. So I was just curious if the Red Republicans had a stated position on the Hawkins Walker Left Unity campaign.
Oh, okay. I will unmute Gerald and Elazar, as well as Kent, so they can better
First
answer
off,
your questions specifically.
can you repeat the question one more time? They were having a hard time hearing you. This is the issue with Zoom. So what exactly are you asking? Do we have a position on? That was the part we couldn't hear.
The Hawkins Walker Left Unity campaign.
No,
I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, no. So we haven't even heard of it.
There's a presidential candidate, Howie Hawkins, and his VP is Angela Walker, and they're endorsed by several DSA chapters. They're actually nominated by our sister organization, the Socialist Party, as well as the Green Party and some other smaller single issue parties, as well as endorsed by the Socialist Alternative and some of their splinter groups. There's been DSA caucuses who've had a stated position on their campaign in the past. Reform and Revolution come to mind. So I was just wondering if this caucus had a stated position on the Hawkins Walker Left Unity campaign.
Yes, I would like to introduce something on that, if I may.
Sure thing. Go on ahead.
Okay. So what this really comes down to, Mark, if you recall, I began my presentation with a discussion of program first. And also I gave you a quote from Eugene Debs. It is better to vote for what you want and not get it than to vote for what you don't want and get it. I would like to submit to you that the Green Party is primarily a middle-class formation. They're decent human beings for sure. They're active out here in Oakland. I work with them on some matters, but I do not call for a vote to them because it seems to me that they are not a socialist organization. That is to say, they are not primarily an anti-capitalist organization. And I think it's a mistake. I want to warn all my young people, accept no substitutes. If you're going to vote, at least vote for someone that is socialist and does not support capitalism. I hope I answered your question. Let us proceed.
Okay. So next to up next, Shazadib. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. So you have a question next, then Jeffrey is after that. And also, before you say anything super quick, my apologies. So as soon as your a question is fully answered and you're done, then unmute as if you can. That way, so we don't have to go back to you and ask you to unmute a few other times. Finished. That's it. Let's go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Adib. I'm from Chicago DSA. Um, I'm a new member. I just joined last week. Um, uh, so my influence is limited. But last night at the chapter meeting, I directly discussed moving away from supporting the Democratic Party and building a revolutionary movement. And there was some organic support from members of the chapter. But of course, the party leadership, the chapter leadership was still in support of electoral politics. So I was just wondering what more I can do to move the party left, more than just trying to convince people one by one.
Can I answer that? I'm talking to my moderator. This is Gerald.
You're going ahead.
Yeah, this is for Adib. Adib, this is a very good thing that you started, but you need to learn how to finish what you start. It is not electoral politics per se that revolutionaries oppose. We just support class struggle politics in elections. That is, we do not support the DSA or anyone else calling for the support of Biden, because Biden represents the Democrats, and the Democrats is the party of the bosses, bankers, and landlords. That's why we oppose them on principle. Under different circumstances, and you are a part of these circumstances, Adib, we must put forward candidates that do represent the interests of the working class. So we are not opposed to all electoral politics, only the electoral politics that support our most bitter enemies. I am finished.
Okay, next on the stack will be TN. No, wait.
Alice.
Jeffrey. No, Alice. Okay. Next will be Alice. And you have the floor.
Oh, yeah. Hi. First of all, thanks to the Red Republicans for throwing this on and to the speakers for their presentations. I just have a quick comment. For anybody who thinks that the goal of building a revolutionary workers' party is somehow some kind of pie in the sky, a lot of people are skeptical of such a goal. Back in 2016, at the height of the last election, Painters Local 10 in Portland, Oregon, passed a resolution saying, break with the bosses parties. We need a class struggle workers' party. And that was done, through the work of, revolutionary communists in that union, organized by Class Struggle Workers Portland, which is fraternally allied to the internationalist group, of which I'm a supporter of their youth section. Fighting for a workers' party, it's a very tangible goal. The question is one of, revolutionary leadership. And that involves, as one of the comrades on the round, I think it was Jacob said, it involves political struggle. It involves line struggle. And so, in fighting for building a workers' party, something comrades are going to have to do and take seriously is engaging in that political struggle, against the opportunists, against the centrists, and against the union bureaucrats, which at every step of the way are going to oppose anybody who's fighting for the political independence of the working class. And that's it. Thanks.
I think that what Alice, that was supposed to be Alice. Thank you so much. I would like somebody else to address that.
Yeah,
I don't want to dominate all the time.
Okay, am I on? Yeah, I thought there was a very excellent point And generally what revolutionaries do that are implanted in a union is they form a left caucus to fight for a program that Gerald says has to be preeminent, and I agree with that. And with a class struggle program, you can fight within the union to relieve the bureaucratic, corrupt leadership of their positions and replace it with a class struggle leadership. That's in the realm of the possibility. It's been done before. And the biggest example of it was in the Fur and Leather Workers Union, that not only was bureaucratized, but the leadership was also members of Murder Incorporated. And the bosses attacked the union under the guise of going after the mob. Well, the workers wisely saw that the bosses didn't care about the mob. They wanted to wipe out the union. So they drove them off. And then they had a secret caucus election and took these gangsters and threw them out of the second story window. They didn't die. There's pictures of them in Philip Foner's book, The History. The Fur and Leather Workers Union is lying in the front of the building. They never came back to the union. The union was restored to workers' democracy and a militant class struggle program for another 10 to 15 years before eventually, living in the capitalist world, it eventually capitulates. Gerald has a very excellent model on that. If you have a program and a group chartered to carry out that program and they failed, within a period of time after the failure of achieving a goal, the group begins to decay. But a nice part of it is often a nucleus within that group goes on, carries the flag and the banner, and restarts another group that has a revolutionary class struggle. So you never give up, even if the group that you're in that started off healthy ends up decaying. You assemble the caucus of those who have a revolutionary, honest position, and you go and you restart yet another group. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. Then next on the stack is Jeffrey. And also, yes, yeah, Jeffrey's next on the stack. And, oh yes, Alice, then you. That is my...
I don't know what's going on.
No, it's Jeffrey.
I'm here. Can you guys hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I've just read, I think 70% of Americans consider themselves middle class, and I've been sitting for this presentation and doing a lot of reading here recently, and I just wonder, I'm sure this question's asked all the time, I just haven't heard it answered, is in terms of language, messaging, et cetera, to the working class, which is I think most of us now in this country, if not struggling class, is there a better way, I guess, and I hate to say this, and if I had more time, I'd figure out how to say it better, but just a better way to market the message in a more, I guess, contemporary context. I think people hear class struggle and they hear dialectical materialism, they hear all of these kind of classical terms that have been in use since, for over 100 years now, right? And first of all, I don't think people understand them. They don't know how to appropriately contextualize them, et cetera. So what can we do, or what are we doing to make the working class struggle message resonate more with the everyday American who thinks he or she is middle class and thinks that they are, certainly the politics of socialism would not improve their lives, rather would I guess, make it worse, I guess is the question. I know it's a broad question, but just some general thoughts on that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Jeffrey, I will try to answer your question. This is Gerald speaking. Look, first of all, what the real question is, how does a revolutionary organization that is a small minority within society change the minds of the majority. It starts off with organization. Organization is the key. So not only do you have to be organized, but you have to put out your ideas in a way that the workers can understand it. Number one, we have a problem in this country, just as you stated, because most people think they're in the middle class, but it is delusional. In this case, the majority is simply wrong. We need to put out ideas, I would argue, in a newspaper that we put out, that we edit, that we write the articles for, and slowly but surely, that newspaper can become, over years, the newspaper of the majority of the working class. In order to do that, though, we have to be conscious that we are trying to bring about a rebirth of the workers' movement. Unfortunately, the left has devolved away from the working class. And it's a tragedy, because the left, or the socialist movement, used to be based on the working class. But we have to start off and understand that while today, I apologize, we are a minority, tomorrow we shall be all. And that only happens by recognizing that you start off as a minority, but by fighting consistently and clearly in your organization, in your publications, on the internet, wherever you can and will convince the majority. My two examples of that, Jeffrey, are the following. There was a time when the majority of Americans in this country believed that slavery was okay, that it was permissible, that it was moral. A small group of people called the abolitionists took that on, and consistently they fought it for years, and eventually began to extend their influence to the point where they formed a political party called the Abolitionist Party. That Abolitionist Party was united with the Free Soil Party and others, and later on became the Republican Party that literally overthrew slavery through the Civil War. And the next example I would like to give you is there was a time when the majority of Americans thought that the Vietnam War was correct, was the right thing to do. But through consistent work, self-sacrifice, and valid propaganda, we began to chip away at that to the point where the majority of Americans turned against the war. What I'm trying to tell you, my dear brother Jeffrey, is that sometimes the majority can be wrong. And when they are, we do not capitulate to that. We try to go forward with what we call the scientific socialist approach and program. That's why I said program first. I hope that I have answered your question.
You have, sir. Thank you.
I'd like to add some comments to that for Jeffrey, if I may. Can you hear me?
I'm here.
Yeah, Jeffrey, first of all, I think it's incumbent upon the working class to win whole sections of the middle class to their side. But many of these people that thought they were middle class before the pandemic are among the 50 million people that lost their jobs, are among the 30 million that lost their health insurance. People that once had secure lives are now in jeopardy. And before the pandemic, our next door neighbor said, what do we need unions for? You can always get a job. Well, what do they say now when 50 million people lost their jobs? And what harm did this do to the big capitalists? Well, they gained an additional $537 billion of income during the pandemic, while these 50 million lost their jobs and while those 30 million lost their health insurance. And there's going to be millions facing evictions with homes they thought they owned because they thought they were middle class. So those illusions are physical illusions, and they can come crashing down as they did for millions of people. Thank you very much.
You're so right.
Hey, so as I posted in the chat, next is TN, and TN, Peter, Katie, Jason, and then Mark and Adib, since they already went. And I'm just doing like for people that go twice, it's like whoever has not speaking the longest, this will go first. So TN, you're good to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Lovely. Hello, my name is Terry. I'm a member of Phoenix DSA, old Yeehaw territory. And I'm also a member of the International Marxist Tendency, so it's lovely to meet all of you. Thank you so much for putting this together. And I had a few things I wanted to say, but I'm actually going to kind of reduce my comments to kind of answering, I believe, Adib's and kind of Jeffrey's sentiments. Like, how do we push, the DSA towards these politics and, this question of branding? And I think this also kind of contributes to a lot of the confusion we see in DSA. So often when we work in DSA circles, work is kind of essentialized into sort of two forms, right? Electoralism or base building, effectively. Essentially what we'll see with a lot of anarchists, which this work isn't bad. I'm not against it, of course. But like, mutual aid, effectively. When I think a lot of the questions that are facing DSA revolve around the question of cadre building. Having a professionalized layer of working class leadership that is able to answer these questions. And this kind of comes down to this question of propaganda and agitation. So propaganda is when, you're essentially you're essentially cadre building. You are building up a Marxist cadre, someone who is able to, again, intervene in the movement, understands the methods of Marxism. And so when you're propagating, you lay out everything. Why is it that we're having these economic crashes? Why, just explaining the overarching social issues that are causing these things in great detail in this scientific way versus agitation, which is, instead of like propaganda, putting forward a lot of ideas to a small amount of people, with agitation, you're putting forward a small amount of ideas, kind of like this direct point to a lot of people. So I don't think it's a question of branding. I think it's a question of how we introduce these things to people.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a very brief quote from Lenin.
Talks too much.
Again, I'll be brief. We thought. Sorry. Okay. So this Lenin quote: "We thought with Plekhanov and with all the leaders of the international working class movement that the propagandist dealing with, say, the question of unemployment must explain the capitalistic nature of the crises, the cause of their inevitability in modern society, etc. In a word, he must present many ideas, to many indeed, that they will be understood as an integral whole by a comparatively few persons. Agitators speaking on the same subject will take as an illustration a fact that is most glaring and most widely known to the audience, say the death of an unemployed worker's family from starvation, the growing impoverishment, etc., and utilizing this fact, known to all, will direct his efforts to presenting a single idea to the masses. The senselessness of the contradiction between the increased wealth and the increase of poverty. He will strive to rouse discontent and indignation among the masses against this crying injustice, leaving a complete explanation of this contradiction to the propagandist. I feel like when there's this temptation when you're an organization like DSA to immediately jump to the masses, right? And that's where you have people claiming that where the workers are at is with the Democrats. They often mistake the mood of the masses for the mood of the left liberals, because they're basically just flocking to whatever is popular right now without having that solid political program. So I completely agree, Gerald. And, you know, what we see instead is essentially them capitulating, you know, for those kind of those quick gains. You know, they're skipping a step. So I think a lot of what the left is doing, the biggest mistake they're making is skipping the propaganda phase. We're very disorganized. We don't have a big layer of leadership. I'll kind of stop there though, so anybody else can jump on.
It's okay. So unless there's any quick, like super quick responses.
I have a comment with respect to that young woman.
Okay.
The Internationalist group wrote a critique of the Austin, Texas DSA, whose leader was organizing police unions. And it's a well-written piece. I actually downloaded it, and we'll put it up maybe somewhere so that DSA people can read it. Thank you.
Okay. Jacob, do a super quick thing, and then we'll move on to Peter.
They should have more than 3 minutes. 3 minutes. No one else should speak.
Okay. Hey Terry, if that's if I caught your name correctly, you said at the beginning of your point there, kind of like a synthesis, how does Red Republicans propose to like push like this platform within the DSA? And while I won't say that this is an official position per se right now, the Red Republican, no, the main organizers, the leadership, what we are heavily considering is building a dual power structure to the DSA National Organizing Committee. So we would essentially build a parallel, you know, national like committee and national organization that would basically do and represent everything we want to see in the DSA, and hopefully win over, you know, the hearts and minds of people of the DSA, seeing that, look, like we over here actually have a plan and we are going to implement it, and it works better than what the current leadership of the DSA is doing. Finished.
Okay. So for the sake of giving everyone a chance to ask their questions, next is Peter. Then following that is Katie, Jason, Aaron, then Mark and Adib. So, Peter, I am unmuting you now, and you have the floor.
All right, thank you. Yes, my name is Peter. I'm a member of Central Jersey DSA, and I'm also on the editorial board of Cosmonaut magazine. So I think where a lot of this discussion started around program, I think was fairly positive, because I think it's one of the things that DSA is sorely lacking, at least in terms of a clearly thought out program for how the working class is going to obtain political power. So I guess my question for the Red Republicans, and just for something for us to think about generally, is what does that program look like? Is it, because in some sense all organizations have programs, they just often happen to be simple reform programs for winning this or that demand, or they're very over articulated kind of pictures of the future without any sense of political strategy.
Right.
So, and realistically, I think the former is what generally predominates within DSA. And I guess my question is, does the Red Republican program kind of orient itself towards the working class seizure of power as its minimum goal, essentially, that this is what DSA needs to propose to the class, and this is what the class needs to do in order to effectively take power from the capitalist class into its own hands, so that it can actually effectively remake society in its own image.
Very good.
Okay, I would like to speak to that if I may.
So you have the floor, Gerald.
Okay. So what Peter now is raising, personally, I think is the question of questions, because you can work and work and work. I've been working on these election campaigns, and I swear to God, I'll never do this again, because it winds up all of your time gets taken up. You have to deal with the unions who are supporting the candidates. You have to deal with picking up the materials. You have to deal with organizing the canvassing. You have to deal with the phone banks. Just dealing with that stuff winds up eating up so much of your time. You can, and I have been guilty of, neglecting the theoretical development of our young people. That's a mistake, Peter. But I would like to suggest to you the following. I do not believe that the Red Republicans, by ourselves, speak for the entire international working class. I think we have to be a little more humble, okay? Now, when you talk about a minimum, that the minimum program is a program for state power, I would like to recommend to you that the old minimum maximum is of not much use to us anymore. We have to map out for the more advanced sectors of the working class how to get to the question of state power. And what that means is understanding the transition from capitalism and the transformation of this situation that we're in to the question of socialism, which the beginning step will be the dictatorship of the proletariat. That program that we embrace is not a single document, but it can be found in the writings of Karl Marx. For instance, the Gotha program, the critique of the Gotha program is a good example. It can be found in the Civil War in France, which was his summary of the communard attempt to hold power, the first worker state on the planet that only existed for a couple of months. But that was the first time the workers took power. And his report and critique of that is essential. It will also take place, and I want to hurry up because other people want to speak. I want to hear from our audience more. I think that if you look at, and I'm telling you right now, Peter, where to go is the first 4 Congresses of the Communist International, in my opinion, laid out the foundational understanding of what that program should be. And that's something we should all take time to familiarize ourselves with, because then you cannot be fooled. I'm hoping that might have been, my comments were useful to you, brother. I would like to stop right there. Finish.
Okay. Next is Ken. So you have about 3 minutes, and then we'll be moving on to Katie. And I'm unmuting you now, and you have the floor.
That was good.
Hey, I wanted to answer this really quick.
Hello? We have him muted. Can we unmute Kent, please?
Yeah,
I didn't touch it, man. Oh my God, I hate Zoom so much. I wanted to say something really quickly. It's not going to take 3 minutes. I think we need to get to the questions. Answering this one more time, you know, it's funny. We experienced in the Red Republicans a very awkward thing. In the beginning, when we started about a year ago, we didn't have a clear goal, and at the time, we were very much thinking transitional program, like a transitional program type thing on how to get there. And we are an independent group of the IMT, the Internationalist Group, and the Bolshevik Tendency. But what's funny is a lot of these people actually came to us and helped us. You know, like we studied them a little bit. You know, and we plan to do it more. And what's funny is we also we've also kind of talked with so those were Trotskyists we were working with. We've also talked with Malice, you know, and then just old school Marxist Leninists. But something in this time when we were kind of getting around it, we only agreed to these very far fetched at the time ideas of this is exactly what things are going to look like if we're going to go here, 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 and there. And basically, pretty much describing exactly what you already said. I mean, you said something that was like over specific, something that was you could give to people, but it's just so over specific and it's not really representative of the whole class because just a few people writing it and being really specific about it. You're totally right. So instead, we are at a different stage. Okay, we're in the DSA. Bobby Sands, I don't know who that is, but we're in the DSA right now. And we know that what we have to talk about is class independence. The only way that we can even have a discussion about workers seizing power and even get to that, okay, get to that conclusion, which is our conclusion, by the way. I don't want anyone thinking that's not, is through class independence, all right? Because that conversation is never going to happen when the bourgeoisie is looking over your shoulder, right? When a guy that is threatened, his entire existence is threatened by you having that talk, not going to let that talk happen. So yeah, I mean, so far our straight goal forward is class independence. We can even have the talk that you're talking about, and we do have that conclusion that the workers do seize power, right? That is definitely our conclusion. I hope that helps.
Okay. So we also have a question specifically about the by Matthew about the transitional program. So if you guys could just answer it in 3 minutes, if possible, then we can keep going. Why would the dynamics of the transition come before taking power? Could you just answer that like a quick like minute 2 statement?
Well, I could comment a bit on that. Am I here being heard?
Yes.
Yes. I'm not sure what he means by transitional. Well, let me just talk about it as I know it. One of the things are a series of demands that they are reforms, but they're reforms of such a nature that they put such pressure on the capitalist system that they lead step by step to the transition first of workers' defense guards, factory committees, workers' councils, national councils, and then vying for a political power. So one of the early demands was a escalator clause, the scale of wages rises with the cost of living. It's called a sliding scale of wages and hours. So as the capitalists uses the worker to make profits and buy machinery to replace workers so it can increase productivity, well, we force him to reduce the number of hours. As the cost of living goes up, those gains in wages have to be recalibrated to match the cost of living going up. So that way,
60 seconds.
By using inflationary techniques, he can't cheat the workers out of additional income. So that is considered a transitional demand. That's just a foundational demand. And Gerald can take over from there.
Okay. For the sake of getting back on stack, because I kind of jumped, popped that person in ahead of Katie and the rest that have been waiting so patiently. So Katie, you are next, and so you have the floor after I unmute you.
Hi, my name's Katie. I'm with the Polk County, Florida DSA chapter. So like we're like a really new chapter, and there's not a lot of leftist or socialist organizations in our area, and we're kind of like one of the first ones so far. So we've been kind of focusing on organizing through mutual aid and trying to focus more on kind of like having like survival programs and like getting food out to people and things like that. I know a lot of the conversation's kind of been about like propaganda and like coming out with like things about how to communicate a lot of our ideas. And I guess mostly my question is, if you're starting like in an area where, there isn't that kind of network or community or history of that level of organizing, is mutual aid like a good way to start? Like, how do you kind of grow that? Like, how do you kind of, I guess what I'm saying like is like, how do you kind of grow and build legitimacy in the community? Because honestly, like in our area, like just coming out and saying like, capitalism bad, like people aren't really like receptive to it, and I don't want it to feel like we're just like another church preaching, but we're preaching like anti-capitalism and socialism and just kind of building legitimacy in the community, I guess.
Okay, so is there anyone that's able to answer that?
Maybe Gerald.
I don't.
No, I'm thinking about it right now, and I'm sorry. I would like to. I don't want to ignore any person, but I'd like Elazar. You got to help me out here.
All right, I'll give it a try. Insofar as I understood, Katie, you're in a new area, you're pioneering, and you want to know how to break out of the box and do some work. So one of the things that the Red Republicans did here in their early phase is they did canvassing all over the area, finding out what were the needs of the working people. And in their own words, instead of feeding them with our propaganda and our agitation, they asked them what was important to them and what needed. Now, Kent was involved in that. And I think that he may wish to address Katie's question, because he did active canvassing, talking to the actual populace in the area, because we also wanted to break out of the box. We also wanted to link up with working class people and find out what were their real issues, what were they faced with, and how we could be of help. So like they had, I don't remember, some kind of things for license plates. I don't remember all the things they did, but maybe Kent could answer that question. Thank you.
Okay, so then Jacob, being a co-chair of a brand new chapter, it can also speak to that. So it'll be Jacob super quick, and then Kent super quick as well, and then we're gonna move on to the next question. So Jacob, once you unmute, so you have the floor.
Okay, Katie. So I'm out here in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which I don't know how much you know about the state of Minnesota, but it is typically seen as a liberal state. It's really not the case. It is pretty purple. It's just that we have a city state here that swings every statewide election Democrat. But St. Cloud out here is a pretty conservative, relatively conservative community as well. And my advice to you, being the co-chair of a chapter that has started about a year ago, is that while mutual aid is great work and that is something that like you should be striving to do, I think if you were this early on in your process of starting up a DSA chapter, your first goal really needs to be organization. Like you need to have organized down to the T your bylaws, and then you need to have organized down to the T. You need a steering committee. You need a group of dedicated 5 to 6 people who are going to be like essentially coming up with the entire like platform, and the agenda for your local DSA. And through like the St. Cloud DSA out here, we actually had to reboot the organization because the way that we were trying to do it and run it and organize it originally was very loose, didn't have a lot of rigid structure to it, and it essentially failed because nobody ever was held accountable. Nobody nothing was written down. Nobody had like specific designated roles. So like really the first thing like you need to do is you need to like organize yourselves and have everything written down. Like this is how we are going to do so and so. And then after you have attained that level of organization, then I would start talking about a single specific focused campaign that you can start doing. And that could be a mutual aid campaign, but that needs to be like the thing that you are focusing on doing and that you're putting all of your effort into doing. And that needs to be like outlined, months and months and months in ahead. What you're doing, planning, organizing, and from there, as you like have the membership, the active membership, to start like sustaining and fueling newer like actions, mutual aid campaigns, you can start doing that. But like I guess to end it off quickly here, my key advice to you is to recognize that starting up, like a lot of these things aren't in the best interest of like organizing a DSA chapter. And the first thing that needs to be done is, reach that level of organization, know who's doing what, and then start assigning specific tasks with specific deadlines, with specific measures on how you're going to achieve those tasks. Finished.
Okay. And then 1 second. I'm posting the stack order after Kent does super quick response as well. So I got the order wrong, I believe. So it's Jason, then Aaron, then Adib.
This is hell. It's Jack. I'm sorry. Hey, Katie. I can actually answer kind of to your conditions really well. In Idaho, one of the most conservative states in the U.S., by the way, when we started out, it was horrible, and I'm gonna say that the issue was that nobody wanted to take responsibility for actually following through on commitments. There was actually this. There was the consensus process came through, which was kind of ridiculous. There was also like if you were assigned something or if you took up a job, you could just kind of fall away. And so what I did to get things on its feet was I started my own organization inside of it. Because what I did is I started what they called the Direct Action Committee, which is really pretty much meaningless. But what we did specifically, because I want to answer the mutual aid thing, is we realized that if we go around and try to like work with the community, well, we have one big problem. We can work with the community, but if the people that are working with the community can't give answers to when community members ask like what you guys are for, it gets weird. In fact, it happened once. We were like handing out flyers, kind of doing a similar thing before I did the Direct Action Committee thing, and the guy that hands out the flyer says, "So you guys actually believe in socialism?" And the guy in the DSA goes, well, not really, man. Like we kind of just we don't think it's realistic. And I turned to him and I was like, Jesus Christ, like you can't say that. And so really after that, we kind of had to redraw everything. And so what I decided to do is say, okay, here's what I say. If you show up to this meeting and you want to be part of this group, well, then you're going to be held to it. And if you're not held to like your commitment and you don't give notice of like if you can't participate, you're out of here. So then the people that were left were like committed. And what we did is we literally went out into the community all over Idaho, way out of where the DSA even was. We knocked on doors in like Weiser, Idaho, which is so far away from Boise. It's like an hour and a half and it's so rural. And we asked them these questions that we had about, hey, so what in this community, what do you think? And the thing about it was when they asked us who we were and we said we were a socialist group, they were surprised. It honestly kind of changed a lot of people's minds. In fact, we were in this community, really poor community that no one had ever visited ever. So they were very surprised. And this guy said, you guys are socialists? You guys care about this stuff? I said, yeah. And believe it or not, they would want to know about our website. They were like, I just want to keep up on you guys. If you guys ever ran for something, we're right there for you. He probably the most conservative looking person I've ever met in my entire life. And this guy, in that moment when we were asking about his interests, it broke through. He knew he was a working class person. The whole neighborhood knew they were. So we just went to him and we asked him, like, so what's your position on this? You know, that's what we did. And I'm going to tell you, it worked pretty well. So that's what I would say. Before you do mutual aid, figure out exactly what they want, if that makes sense. If you do mutual aid without it or just get involved with like, I know like we have anarchist groups here in Boise that do like mutual aid stuff. It kind of just becomes cliquey and it's not really like to the community. It's to very specific communities. But if you want to help communities in large, I say ask them what they are, what they want, and then see how you can follow through and help that. So that's what I would say. I think that is very good. I think you guys should be doing that. You guys got to make sure that you know what they want, you know.
Okay, Kate, you'll be unmuted really quick. Then we gotta just move on to Aaron, to Jason, and then Aaron, both of which have been waiting so patiently. So.
7:57.
Hi, I appreciate you guys' responses on this. I feel I should have clarified. The mutual aid program's been going for 16 weeks. Like we're in the community, we're being known by the community. Like we're talking with the community, finding out what they need. Like what I was trying to say is that I see what a lot of these other organizations and a lot of other Marxists, and I see what a lot of other revolutionary organizations have done. And you know, we're doing that. We're taking the steps. We're in the community, talking to people, but it's a situation where. And like I said, it's been going for 16 weeks. It's just have to like taking it to that kind of next level and everything. So like if you guys are saying like, you know, keep canvassing and like keep doing that and it's just a time thing, then I totally appreciate knowing that we're on the right track with this. I was just kind of wondering more to how to kind of take that to another level and that kind of thing. So I appreciate y'all's feedback and taking my question so much. So thank you.
Okay, so if there's any responses to that, just drop it in chat, just because I do want to keep it moving. So next up, Jason, and so once you're unmuted, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Jason Wright, supporter of the Bolshevik tendency. And as a revolutionary Marxist, I just wanted to address the comment about the fact that we're talking about class so much. I believe that class is a relationship to the means of production. And in that sense, from a farm worker or a restaurant worker who in some states may be making less than the federal minimum wage, to a unionized auto plant worker who may be making over $100 an hour, there is a community of interest that they are all oppressed, exploited, and wage slaves under the system. And, you know, by contrast, I think what you've got to keep in mind is that even a poor farmer or somebody who owns their own tractor trailer can have a false consciousness that sees them as being invested in supporting capitalism. And as Elazar and Gerald said, we need to try to win those people too. And you also have people who are not a part of the 1%, but who are ideologically committed to protecting the interests of the 1% and paid to protect it, like the police, like the officer corps of the military, like the pundits and the politicians, quite frankly. And, you know, I think that when we're talking about, you know, are these terms going to scare people? The reality is the Republicans and the conservatives and the Wall Street Journal talk about class warfare all the time. It's the Democrats and the liberals who hide from that language and want to avoid it. What we have to do is wage a fight to return it to acceptability on the side of the working class in terms of recognizing that they have class interests that are militantly and diametrically opposed to the interest of the bosses. Having said that, I do want to recognize that there is a false consciousness within the working class, that one of the reasons why there's never been truly a mass social democratic party in the US is because of the horrific legacy of racism and xenophobia against immigrants. But this is fundamentally a false consciousness. It leads to the continued exploitation of white workers, as well as the super exploitation of Black and immigrant workers and other minority workers. And you know, as people seeking to build a revolutionary workers' party, we need to be committed to fighting exploitation as well. And I think that I just want to bring it back and say that we cannot abdicate preserving and teaching the history of the movement. Like, I think that you can use defensive formulations. We don't always have to say dictatorship of the proletariat. That might not be the formulation you want to use in passing a union's resolution or going door to door and knocking on doors. But at the same time, that if we do not defend the Enlightenment rationality, if we do not defend basic unionist principles, if we do not preserve the history of socialism, including the reason that social democracy failed and betrayed the interest of the workers during the outbreak of World War I, then we are contributing to the vacuum of leadership. And I think that what's been talked about here, the transitional stage, it is not a transitional stage that we are talking about from the overthrow of capitalism to the building of socialism, but Leon Trotsky's transitional program that was the draft program for the Fourth International that was composed in 1938 and passed at the founding conference in 1940, which tried to lay out ways in which one could struggle for socialism within the context of the world with reforms, as Elazar said, that could not be met, could not be satisfied entirely under capitalism, and would therefore naturally lead workers to look at going beyond capitalism. And I would suggest that what DSA needs is a caucus that has transitional demands and can try to have a faction that reintroduces the idea of the need for revolutionary struggle, that tries to undo the history and legacy of betrayals of social democracy and leads it in a revolutionary direction without making the same mistakes of the Stalinist degeneration either, but truly represents the legacy of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So due to the fact that it's getting a bit later, so unless there's any super pressing questions or responses to that,
Alex, can I just say one thing, please?
Yeah, super quick.
I think that speaker spoke eloquently, but I just wanted Jeffrey and other people that put stuff in the chat. I tried to pay some attention to the chat, and that's what made me miss out on the sister's comment and question. And so I had to write Jeffrey back that I simply can't keep up with the discussion and at the same time pay attention to the chat. I'm admirable of all of you guys that can do both at one time. I cannot, so I'm going to pay exclusive attention to our discussion. I apologize for my error. I'm done.
Okay. Next is Aaron. Thank you so much for waiting patiently, and I see you have the floor.
Hi, I'm Aaron from Portland. I'm a supporter of the International Group's youth group, the Revolutionary International Youth, like Alice. I just wanted to talk about an instance of multiracial, multi-ethnic working class action and practice. On Juneteenth of this year, the ILWU, which is the Longshoremen's Union, shut down all West Coast ports in the United States, as well as Vancouver, Canada, which has never been done before. In protest of the racist police murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others. This is an example of what we call revolutionary integrationism, where instead of each sector of the working class having its own independent group, all the specially oppressed groups, Black people, women, gay people, within the working class fight together with a class struggle leadership. The Internationalist Group not only espouses the perspective of revolutionary integrationism, but helps put it into practice during this historic shutdown led by the ILWU, helping as vital working class action. I also wanted to briefly point out how some so-called socialists cross the class line by calling cops workers and not pushing cops out of unions, as previous speakers have rightly pointed out is crucial to class struggle. A truly revolutionary leadership must have a firm class line. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to speak on that if I may.
Okay.
Okay. I was involved up to my neck in that particular mobilization on Juneteenth. The union intentionally picked the Black holiday celebrating the end of slavery. And by the way, you should know that 19,000 workers attended the rally and march. And I tried to influence the DSA's involvement, which I was successful in, and we had a magnificent contingent of over 300 people. It was inspiring to see that contingent marching together with all of our signs, etc. But here's the point. Here is the weakness of that, okay? That union took a major stance and we got everybody to come out, and that was great. But in order to keep up that level of activity requires a workers' party. Individuals acting together and getting the union to do what was in this case a very positive thing are not enough, because we simply could not keep it going on a day-to-day basis. So for instance, I want to ask my dear comrade from Portland, when I was reading about what was going on in Portland, I saw a labor contingent that was opposed to fascism. And it lifted my heart. And I said, at last, Lord, thank you. But then I noticed at subsequent anti-fascist mobilizations, I no longer saw that banner or those workers together. And this is what I'm trying to say to y'all and to you also, comrade. It's not enough to do something right one time, even if it is a spectacular, success like June 19th with the ILWU. We got to keep up the pressure on Babylon every day, not once a month, not once every 6 months. And if we can't do that, then I think we got to understand what is the missing ingredient. We must build a party of the working class that can coordinate our daily activity on these fronts. That is not a put down of my young friend, but it is a conclusion that I have come to in working on all of the things that he was talking about. And you could also just tell me what happened in Portland, because I saw you guys out there and I was very happy, but then I didn't see any more. What's up?
I'd like to make a comment too on that.
Okay, just do your comment super quick, and then there'll be a response.
Right, I just wanted to mention that my friend Jack, former ILWU, attempted to not only shut down the whole West Coast, including Canada, United States, but he tried to close down the East Coast, which would have been a very powerful combination. He failed to do that, but that doesn't mean we should quit doing that. Another aspect is that given the period that we're in and the point that Gerald just made, the way to break out of this box is by revolutionary regroupment. So what the internationalist group did was wonderful. What the Bolshevik tendency did on Pier 80, stopping the apartheid cargo from being unloaded in a united front with Trotskyists and the former Stalinist Communist Party leader, Leo Robinson. That was an important thing. What the Spartacus League did in Washington, D.C., mobilizing the working class in, I think, 1982 to stop the Klan, having the 60th anniversary of their big 1922 March of 40,000 in D.C. Those are important stepstones. But to achieve the steps that Gerald is talking about, we need revolutionary regroupment. We don't need to fight with each other. We can have different ideas. We can critique each other, but the Leninist concept of the united front permits us to strike together and have divided ranks on ideas, but unite on common actions. That is the way forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, so then I'm going to unmute for a quick response, and then after that, we'll go to Mark and Adib.
Hi, I just wanted to point out the fact that the Internationalist Group vitally recognizes the need to form a Workers' Party to, as Gerald said, sustain these actions. It is true that you need a strong Workers' Party to keep these actions going, but we also need to recognize that the working class learns through experience, and it's through the intervention of revolutionaries like the Internationalist Group into these specific instances of the class struggle, like the ILWU shutdown, that build this experience. And this is not something that the Internationalist Group has just started doing. A few years ago, there were some fascists who were planning to march in San Francisco, and by working with the ILWU, the Internationalist Group was able to get them to not even to cancel their march. Another example is in 1996 and I think it's 97, there was a huge union fight to kick the cops and militarized firemen out of a union in Volta Redonda, a metal working town in Brazil, which the Internationalist Group's international group, the League for the Fourth International chapter in Brazil, was militantly part of. I also wanted to say on the question of Portland, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to by our comrades' absence in recent anti-fascist mobilizations. A few weeks ago, there was a huge mobilization against the Proud Boys, who were holding a rally in Portland, and we attended that with a labor contingent. So we have remained involved. We haven't been able to go to every single anti-fascist counter protest in Portland, but everyone that we're able to go to, we do go to, as long as we're able to, as Lenin says in the tactic of the United Front, strike together but march separately. So I just wanted to quickly interject that. Thank you.
Okay. So now, we're gonna go into Mark and Adib. So Mark, so you'll go first, and then Adib after, and then if there's any further questions, just again type stack in the chat. So you have the floor.
Thanks. So I'm sorry, I'm still slightly confused about, I guess kind of putting the program in the chat. I haven't read it yet. I just got it. Answers my question, but maybe just to ask redundantly, what's like the elevator pitch for the Red Republicans? Like, what's the in the nutshell? Is it simply to just impose democratic centralism on the DSA? Is it to kind of formulate a organizational wide program? Like, what's the too long didn't read version of the objective of the Red Republicans? Over.
Okay. If it's fine with everyone, yeah, Kent. So if you could answer that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. The elevator pitch. Okay. Well, one, I would encourage you to look at the website soon, because it's kind of late, and I don't imagine I'm going to give you a great elevator pitch, but goddamn, I'll try. So first off, I think the Red Republicans recognize first that what we need is to reorganize the DSA to make it a healthy structure if it's going to be a revolutionary organization, because we don't think it is a revolutionary organization. We don't think it is currently, and maybe it could never be, but our goal is to try, right? So that means to reorganize the DSA, right, and to also hopefully bring about a regroupment of the left in general. Which means not just the DSA, other groups. The DSA might not become the Workers' Party, but the DSA better help create it. All right, that's what our goal is, right? So we need to create the Workers' Party, which will mean the regroupment of so many groups. The whole goal is that we can all be in the same party, right? That's our thing, not just another party that's just going to exist along a million others. That's not much of a Workers' Party. Right, we're talking about something that a lot of people with different ideas are going to be in, which means it's going to have to be a pretty damn healthy structure to make sure that doesn't go down a awful path. So now the question on democratic centralism is tough, because if you read the DSA, bylaws, what it says is if you're part of a democratic centralist organization, if you're under the discipline of it, you can get kicked out. Well, so what we're saying definitely is that we have certain principles of democracy and centralization that we want to see put. So that's how we answer that. Now, does that mean complete bans on factionalism if they're completely internal? No, right? So I guess our take on our principles on democracy and centralization might be a lot different. So when you say democratic centralism, that means a lot of different things to different people, as I've learned over the years. You talk to the Communist Party, it's one thing. You talk to the PSL, it's one thing. You talk to the International Marxist Tendency, it's another thing. You talk to, what's the Bob Akin group? I'm thinking about it. Is that the Revolutionary Communist Party? Is that
Yes.
their name?
Yes.
Yeah. You talk to them about it, it's another thing. What I'm just pointing out is if you go on our website, actually, we actually say, like our structure, like what are we looking for? We try to put a pretty clear thing down, and it can be improved still. It's not perfect. That's why it's a draft program. So does that answer your question? Comment? So does that answer that for you?
We don't know if he was listening.
He has muted himself, and
okay.
So I'm not.
Let's
I'm
move
not sure
on. Time is short.
Okay. So then, next is Adib. Then, so as soon as you're, oh, okay. So as soon as you're unmuted, you have the floor. Thank you for waiting so patiently, by the way, Adib.
Lenin said that for decades nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. You know, there's always a moment for a potential revolution. The U.S. right now is currently an empire in decline, and we're also undergoing an ecological catastrophe that, as it worsens, will leave many more people destitute. So I think that in the coming decades there will be a moment for potential revolution, but in the absence of a labor movement and in the absence of a revolutionary socialist organization, that potential will not be actualized. Also, so focusing on electoral politics too much takes away from building a revolutionary movement. And the U.S. is, a vast global empire. U.S. politics affects people outside of the U.S. more than people inside the U.S. And the way it's been affecting most people outside the U.S. is being murdered. And the U.S. is a military-industrial complex.
This, a little bit of that.
Oh, that's 1 second.
So it doesn't matter, how many socialists we put in local governments. People overseas are still going to be murdered. I would like to see a more anti-imperialist stance from the DSA. Aimé Césaire, the African poet, said that imperialism is just fascism by another name. We're having a ridiculous debate in our culture about whether Trump is a fascist or not. The whole U.S. is a fascist nation. It always has been.
I'd like to comment on that.
Okay, I want to comment on that because I definitely sympathize with some of Adib's politics, but I think this misunderstanding as to what fascism really is and how to fight it can lead us down some fairly serious distractions or roads that lead nowhere. Adib, I could not disagree with you more when you say that the U.S. is currently a fascist nation. I want to give you some my experience with this. When I was in the Panthers, they instituted a program called COINTELPRO, and they then began to attack our offices and in some cases assassinate our leaders like Fred Hampton. And in fact, they arrested the entire leadership of the New York branch, which led to the Panther 21 campaign, defense campaign. Now, if indeed we were calling the fascist pigs and fascist America with 3 Ks as a subjective response to all of these attacks that were happening to us all at the same time, I understand why we said what we said, but now I have to look back and make corrections. Because in fact, if the United States really was fascist in 1968, 69, 70, we would not have won the case of the Panther 21. As it wound up, all of those leaders, all 21 of them, were found innocent by a jury. and we defeated the state of New York in what was for me a historic lesson. Fascism, there's no such thing as a trial where a jury finds against the state under fascism. No, we do not live under fascism. We could call it a democratic police state in some ways, and certainly we have problems, but it is not fascism, my friend, because we wouldn't be having this meeting right now if we were living under fascism. Elazar, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Adib. Equating U.S. society, even imperialist U.S. society, with fascism is an error. First of all, fascism doesn't come to power through ordinary bourgeois electoral politics. It has to have a mass, semi-autonomous, usually petty bourgeois movement with elements of the lumpen proletariat, elements of young workers, to be a battering ram, smashing every last vestige of working class democracy in the country. Every union, every worker sports club, any functional thing that the workers built over the last 100 years. That's what fascism did in Germany. It's hired for that purpose, but it has to begin in a certain way, and its program, once it achieves power, is undercut, and its plebeian radicalism is either exterminated or incorporated into the state. So let me just talk about the so-called early period of American life, where the indigenous people were exterminated and enslaved. That's usually overlooked, that over 4 to 5 million natives in what became the United States were enslaved, even more in what became Mexico. And the continent of 100 million indigenous people was not just reduced by disease. That has been disproven by the very splendid work of Andres Resende's book, The Other Slavery. Then you had maybe 60 to 90 million Blacks exterminated to bring 12 million slaves to the New World. All this in the early phase of mercantile and developing bourgeois democracy. So, and that's pretty bad stuff. The working class was shot in the back in demonstrations. Union leaders were framed up and executed, all under bourgeois democracies. When that isn't enough, though that can be handled by the normal bourgeois state and the military and a military dictatorship. But when you have a huge working class, like which was erected in the CIO of millions of workers, you cannot oust that and destroy it and monitor it and keep it from class struggle just by normal bourgeois state structures. You need a mass fascist movement. We haven't had that yet in the United States. They could have stopped it in Germany if they didn't do this silly social fascism and had a Leninist united front between all sections of the working class, many of which were armed. They could have isolated, contained, disarmed. Hitler said that. All they had to do was be ruthlessly attack us unceasingly right from the beginning. We wouldn't have had a chance. So that's my critique of what you're saying. I understand your passion, and I hate imperialism too, but it's an error to think that that is fascism. Thank you.
Okay, Kent is next for a response if you still want to, and then that's after you, Kent. So.
Adib, I think you said something fantastic, but I think there's a misconception of what we mean by electoral politics, because I do understand. I actually am very sympathetic to your position, and I think with semantics that we're dealing with, because I want to pull back on a speech I actually sent you by Karl Marx in 1850 about what do we do post-bourgeois revolution. If you want me to, I'll read it straight, but I think this is very important to talk about. He talks about the speedy organization of and centralization of workers' clubs under, established movement center of operations. All right. He talks about creating a workers' party, but what does that workers' party do? Right. Well, it actually does run in elections. All right. But he says really specifically here, it's not just to win. All right. We're probably not going to win. All right. And here I can find the thing. The workers' candidates are nominated everywhere in opposition to the bourgeois Democratic candidates. As far as possible, they should be league. He's talking about the Communist League, and their election should be pursued by all possible means. Now, here's the part that's important. Even where there is no prospect of achieving their election, the workers must put up their own candidates to preserve their independence, to gauge their own strengths, and to bring their revolutionary position and party standpoint to public attention. Now, right there is the point of electoral politics, well, as I would put it, not to win, right? We can't, as Marx said in the Civil War in France, he actually quotes it in I think the German edition of the manifesto. He says that the working class cannot use state machinery, bourgeois state machinery, for its own purpose. It can't wield it for its own purpose. Okay, we know that, all right? Marx knows this, but the whole point of that motto of the First International, that the emancipation of the working class can only be, done by the working class itself, it's supposed to be that even in bourgeois elections, right, we are still preserving our independence, all right? We are still running a candidate, and we are using that as a billboard for our program. And our program can't be satisfied under capitalism. It can't be satisfied until workers seize power, and that is the point. So you are correct in saying we shouldn't be dealing with electoral politics, because the electoral politics you're talking about is of the bourgeois class, right? It's about running Democrats, right? So we really can't even talk about electoral politics until we have a workers' party, because only then can electoral politics even serve any interest to us as a billboard for our program to help us reach out to people, right? So that's what I wanted to say, because I don't really think we're in disagreement, but I just think it's semantics. Does that? What do you say to that, comrade?
Okay, Adib, I am going to unmute you momentarily. I have a few windows open.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, it was a great response. I agree wholeheartedly.
Thought you would.
Yeah, I did mean I was thinking of the Democratic Party when I was criticizing electoral politics.
Rightfully so. All right, we good? So is that the last question?
Okay. So if there are no further questions, or Adib, if you don't want to say anything further, then we can end this educational.
I sent in an application for with the Red Republicans, but I haven't gotten a response yet. So yeah.
Those aren't going to be answered till tomorrow. We've got that email a few times. Like, why haven't they been answered? It's because we're going to wait till after the presentation, so we can really get, so we could really make sure that we get everybody in like one swoop.
Yeah. And then Jason put a question in chat. It's like, so if they're interested, should they send an email to the Red Republicans? There's a specific thing on the website, redrepublicans.org. It's super easy. It's on the top right corner of the website. Just because it asks some good questions, just so we can figure just so we can know a bit about you before we even do the phone call to follow up. So just answering that question real quick. Okay. So if there are no further questions, so I'd like to thank you all for coming. Devin, Devin is just saying that this was a fantastic conversation. So yeah, so with that, I'd like to say the same thing as Devin. So it was fantastic conversations and a fantastic class errors and technical difficulties notwithstanding. So thank you all again, Gerald and Elazar, for giving us your time, knowledge, and expertise.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you.
And if Kent, so do you have any final closing remarks, or should we summarize the points that were made?
I would like to add one thing to summarize, if I may.
Okay.
Look, I think we had a very good discussion. I was extremely pleased at the high caliber of questions that were raised by our audience. I want to thank y'all for that. But remember, program first. Okay? Do not that was the key lesson for this evening. And playing the lesser evil game perpetuates our exploitation and oppression. Please do not forget that. And please do not forget that Joe Biden, the main point we were trying to raise earlier, is no to Biden. Build an alternative to the twin parties of capital, a workers' party. That was the message of this whole evening. Joe Biden stated that if a Medicare for All bill passed his desk, that he would veto it.
Right.
We used to call Bill Clinton Crime Bill Clinton. Once again, that was Joe Biden that wrote that horrible bill and led to mass incarceration. Biden has attacked and undermined Social Security with Obama.